Greetings! Welcome to this video. Today we're going to be designing a spooky witch for the spooky season. Let me take you guys along on this process, and if you'd like to learn how to improve your character design, then keep on watching. First, let's discuss our character overview. I was scrolling through my previous sketches to see if I could adapt it to the character that I envisioned making. I knew I wanted a witch, but I didn't know what kind of witch or atmosphere I wanted yet. I found the perfect pose that I had already sketched. I was keeping in mind though that pose needed to have enough room to play with her hat. Sketching is the most important part of the drawing in my opinion. I normally do about 4 to 5 layers, which is why I think digital art works so well for me. It allows me to play with different elements of the character and easily change and layer different designs. After about an hour of sketching, I decided I want to make a witch of death. I came up with a mood board for her which involved the key elements of her character. This included communing with the dead, seeing beauty in the fragility of life, and honouring the dead. These were the 3 most important factors which I wanted to include in my drawing in some way. Examples of this would be the skull on her hat, the silky film over her eyes, or even the feathers on her hat as well. Even if it's not immediately noticeable that she is a witch of death, I like including these subtle elements to nod to her story. I went through a few different design elements in her hair specifically. I wasn't sure whether I wanted a veil, ribbons, or even a bow. I had some trouble with the hair as well, so I left it to the end because I knew I wanted to push myself with this drawing and make the hair way more detailed than I usually do. I actually made a custom brush for this drawing, which I used for basically the whole thing, from the sketch to the line art to the shading. I wanted a brush that I could size up and size down to achieve a more traditional look, like I was drawing with pen and paper. I found all the brushes I had either looked good as a line art but not a rendering brush, and I wanted to streamline the process a bit more with this drawing, and I think I accidentally made my new favourite brush. After I do the line art, I usually do 4 thumbnails to test some colour palettes, but I had a fairly good idea of the vibes I wanted for this drawing, so I found a palette I liked from the beginning. I knew I wanted fall colours, which I associated with muted greens, oranges and yellows. I had a little bit of trouble with this pose, which is why you see me redrawing it so much. I cut a bunch of it out, and I even have it sped up to about 8 times speed, so I got through it. Usually when I run into bits like this where I'm struggling, I'll bring in the reference that I'm using it and overlay it over my drawing and then adjust it however it needs to be adjusted. Like I could see the chest was too high up. I needed her, or low down, sorry. I needed to change her chest to be higher because it was just anatomically too low on her body. Here I'm playing with some design elements on her hat. I pictured this as like a leaf, a vine crawling up her hat, but I ended up not going with it, which is why I think it's so important to do multiple sketch layers so that you can change and move things around as much as you need to. As soon as I've done the liner, I move on to the flat colours of the drawing, and this includes no shading. And once I have the flat colours down, I'm not shading the drawing necessarily, like there's no lighting put on her here. I'm essentially just getting the flat colours down. So the blush on her cheek, I wanted her eyes to be darker, so it's not a shadow, but I did want the like makeup on her face to be darker. So that's literally all this is just adding in gradients to put a bit of depth on the flat colours that are there. If you want to make your own spooky character, I highly recommend researching folk tales. Being an Irish artist myself, there's so much inspiration to be found in local stories. One of the stories in my town is about a witch who jumped from hill to hill and dropped stones from her pockets, leaving them behind, still to be found to this day. There are 4 hills in total in this story, and as she jumped from the 3rd hill to the last, she fell and died, being buried where she fell. I'd love to hear your spooky stories in the comments below. Feel free to share any of your local scary stories. Halloween itself originating in Ireland, so researching different real-life examples can heavily influence your art. To create that dark and moody atmosphere in your drawing, try using darker colours than you normally would. If you want to bring some light back into it, you could try adding some glowing elements such as eyes or even an off-screen light source. During this part of the drawing, when I'm really just adding depth to it, I'm keeping in mind which parts of the face are sticking out and which parts of the face would be behind. So an example with this is her nose, where the tip of it would be protruding, so you add a highlight to it, you add the shadows where it would be further back in her head. So that's what I'm doing with the eyes right now. I'm adding makeup to her while also keeping in mind where the shadows would be in her eyes. So again, this is not lighting, this is just adding dimension to her face. I took a lot of inspiration for this part of it. You could see I had a mood board up with different pictures from Pinterest and Instagram artists that I follow. Here I'm referencing my own art because I think that's just as important when you're using references to include some of your favourite artwork so that you can go back and see exactly how you did things. My favourite part of the drawing is adding the light in. I use the same technique for this in nearly every drawing, but you really just have to find what works for you. I personally like to use a multiply layer to darken the image, and then I use a combination of overlay and colour dodge on top of that to bring back the light of the drawing. This is a lot of layering because as you go, you'll notice some sections of the drawing should be reflected on other parts of it. I like this part a lot because you can really change the whole atmosphere of a drawing with just the lighting. I specifically used yellow and orange because I felt like it resembled the glow of jack-o'-lanterns or potentially candles on a grave or in her witch's study. I wanted to keep the background plain to emphasise the character and her silhouette, but the glow alludes to something being off screen, which I think adds to her story and makes you want to know more about her. I like to use the lasso tool to do this section of the drawing, and as I go I will be blurring sections of it with the blur tool and keeping some sections with a hard edge. This balance of hard and soft edges isn't easy. It's not an easy thing to know where the hard and soft edges should go. It's kind of just one of those things you have to feel out and see where the drawing takes you. The whole time that I'm colouring this lighting, I'm keeping in mind that there is an imaginary light source on the left side of the screen. So that is where all of this light is coming from, to the left and slightly below her, which is why you're going to see I light up the bottom of her hat as well. So this is really important to know so that the lighting stays consistent on the whole drawing. And I do this in layers, so right now I'm just doing that light from the left hand side. So this is going to be a really harsh and obvious light. This first colour dodge layer where I'm adding in this harsh orange yellow light, it's going to be the most important layer of your lighting because this is going to dictate the mood and vibe of the rest of the drawing. And the reason this is because, for example, the light from her hair is going to reflect onto her skin and vice versa. So with this first layer, we are only keeping in mind the harsh light coming from the left. When we move on to the second layer, we're going to be doing the reflected light, and this reflected light, for example, is going to be, okay, there's hard light on her shoulder. That hard light is going to reflect onto her lips, it's going to reflect onto her nose, it's going to reflect onto the other side of the hair. So we need, this first layer is the most important one, so do pay the most attention to this one. I'm going to do my best to explain this, but I am moving on to the reflected light now. And what the reflected light is, for example, is that light on her lips, which is coming from her shoulder. I'm not paying attention to the light source to the left anymore. All I'm paying attention to is where the light source on her skin is going to reflect on her body. So for example, there's going to be light on her chest because of her arm. So this section of the drawing is a lot of back and forth and figuring out what looks right. For me personally, this is where you really see the drawing come together, and depending on the design of your character, depending on the design of the illustration you're making, this process can take a while. If your drawing is really big and there's multiple different elements in it, it could take a while to get that proper reflected light. I've been practicing this style of hard light for a while now, and I think I've gotten it down for the most part. I'm improving with every drawing, so I'm really happy to see with this drawing you can really see my improvement with lighting and understanding how it works. As an artist, you will never stop learning. There is always things that you can improve on and work on and change and find out new things about yourself that maybe you prefer doing things this way or that way. So as an artist, it's really important to play around and change up your technique every now and then and look into what other artists are doing. I personally sometimes have a hard time with knowing when to stop in a drawing. I feel like every artist knows this feeling when you get to a point where you feel like you can't do any more. But then I know in 3 months down the line, I'm going to look at this drawing like, oh, I could add this, or I could do that, or I would have blended the nose differently. So, like I said, it's really important to keep playing and figuring out what works for you. Anyway, we're coming to the end of the video now. I really hope you enjoyed watching. This is actually my favourite drawing I've made recently, so I'm super proud to be sharing it with you. Don't forget to stay safe out there this Halloween, and if you're interested in my commissions, I will have them linked below where you can reach out to me directly or even check out my Etsy shop. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye!